So yes, technically this is an amplifier. It takes the signal that you generate from your hands to the guitar strings through the cable, and then it converts that and it amplifies it out as sound. But is it a sound you'd want? I've had this amp here for a couple of weeks. It's on loan to me from Coda Guitars, who I'm grateful for lending it. The reason I've got it is because I've got an original one of these Falcons, and I wanted to see if the new ones could live up to that. The look of them actually impressed me. But the fact of the matter is, after a couple of weeks of turning it on here and there, I mean, I'd rather plug in a Hot Rod Deluxe, which I have, and I don't even like the Hot Rod Deluxe, if I'm honest with you, but it would really soothe my ears. What I want to do in this video is show you what I mean. I've got some samples that I've played. Then I want to try and find one sound in it that I actually really like. And then we'll hear my original Gibson Falcon as well. So you can see that I do think there would be potential for a great amp from Gibson. But I just don't think this is it, right? Let's hear what I mean through various guitars first. But let me show you around the amp a little bit, and I'll show you what I do like about it as well. Okay, before I say anything else about this amp, before I show you what it sounds like and everything, I do want to give Gibson some credit for the effort they've put into the way this thing looks. And if you don't know what this is, well, we're going to take a close look at this Gibson Falcon 5. As soon as this amp was announced, I was actually really excited because I've got an original Gibson Falcon, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And I heard about this release before I saw anything, and so I wasn't sure exactly what they were going to do. Were they just releasing a modern amp and giving it the old name? Or were they doing a proper sort of reissue, so to speak? Or we've got something in between. Now today I've got the 5-watt version of this. There is also a 20-watt version, which I probably can get my hands on at some point soon. But thanks to Coda Guitars here in the UK who've lent me this one to have a look at. And we're going to listen to it with a couple of guitars and compare it to the original as well. I don't know how well that's going to go for this new Falcon, to be honest with you. I've played it for a little while already, and I've got some things I think about it. But let's have a closer look at that visual that they've got going on here, which I think was a good move. The first thing I noticed was this handle. It's really good. It reminds me of original Gibson amp handles, like the one on my own vintage Gibson here, which is a Falcon from the early 60s. And other Gibson amps also had these proper, you know, screwed down, whether they were wood or some other sort of plastic and metal or wooden metal thing. But Gibson decided to follow that heritage and actually put the effort in to make that happen. Which, you know what, in this day and age when tooling and industry and infrastructure and shipping and everything is so expensive, they actually went that extra step to make sure this was not just a completely new amp with an old name. This is also quite large for a 5-watt amp, which I like because you're more likely to get a bigger sound in the room. It's much bigger than a Fender Champ, a Tweed Champ. Is that going to mean it sounds a bit less boxy? We'll find out. I've not actually recorded the amp yet, so I'm not sure what it's going to sound like recorded, and I'm intrigued to find out. Will it sound like a bigger thing than it is? So again, they put some effort into designing this panel. It has got some of the old look of the way these were originally, and it's quite unique in the amp world. I've never really seen, you know, other amps that have this Gibson look to them, and I really welcome that. You can see it's quite simple. There's a volume, a tone, and a reverb, but there is also a half power switch or a full and low power switch, which I think is quite interesting in a 5-watt amp because it's already only 5 watts. But it is quite a loud 5 watts, which is impressive in its own right. This means this amp, I think, could really manage small gigs, definitely mic'd up, of course, but even if it wasn't, which I wasn't expecting. But I think we need to start plugging it in and just get a sense of what it sounds like. We'll set it pretty vanilla, lower volume, put the tone in the middle, the reverb about a quarter of the way up. Let's just see what exactly we're playing with. So at that quarter volume, it's okay. It's got a little bit of character to it, not a hell of a lot of character, but it does a perfectly passable little clean sound there that's actually sounds like more like a vintage sound than a new sound. You know, it's quite a bright amp. I often had found myself turning the tone really far down on any guitar, but this particular guitar, the P90, and it is an original mid-50s, probably 53 or 54 P90, and they are quite bright. As you heard there, it sounded okay. Let's turn the volume up a bit more. Okay, so you get the volume to halfway and it does come to life. But this is where the issues for me start. There's a real nasal quality to it, but it's also really brittle and harsh sounding. And this doesn't really get better the more you turn it up. You know, often with this sort of amp, you do get to a point where you don't love the sound, right? It's just got that overdrive and it's a bit harsh. But when you start turning it up even more, it compresses, rolls off and becomes more soft. This doesn't really manage that, as we'll find out in a second. So you get a bit more juice out of it when you go up to 3/4 and then full, which you'll also hear. And to be honest, of all the guitars I've tried and the settings, this guitar and these last couple of settings are the best sound I think I've found. I think the fact that it suits this old P90 when it's turned up like that does give some credit to the idea that they've gone for a more vintage amp design, and that, you know, this is maybe the sound they're going for, a sort of like garage rock, you know. I think we need to plug in. I've got an Esquire, a Strat, a semi-hollow guitar with humbuckers and a solid body guitar with humbuckers. We're just going to hear a little bit of each. And I got the amp set at 3/4, which is why I thought this P90 did its best. But I didn't think the other guitars really managed to get a great sound out of it, which I know is the amp's fault, because these guitars can, well, like any guitar really, you can get a good sound out of most amps. Let's hear it. So the amp really wasn't feeling that Esquire, I don't think, at all. It was actually quite unpleasant in the room. And that Esquire-ish guitar that I made myself, it sounds pretty good with other amps. So I don't think it's the guitar or the pickup, which is a really good throwback pickup in there. It just was harsh. And then I plugged in this semi-hollow Collings 335 type guitar. Let's hear a bit of that. So whilst there was some promise in there and some few moments where I thought, okay, I'm getting somewhere, it was mushy in the bottom end. That might be because it's turned up to 3/4, but then the neck pickup was rolled back a lot there. If I put the bridge pickup on, which you'll hear in a second, nah. It's a shame. I very rarely put negative reviews up on my channel. I haven't done it very often because what's the point? Like I need to feel inspired to make it interesting to myself. This has left me feeling really, nah. I just want it out, really. We've got the Strat and another guitar to hear briefly. But then I want to just finish off by playing my old Falcon, which, to be honest with you, is cheaper than a new one of these Falcons, even the 5-watt one, and just sounds so much more interesting. Sometimes they come up on the market, these old Falcons. Make sure you get an early to mid-60s one. They start to go downhill as well after that, I believe. You might find the late 60s ones are okay, but they carried on using the Falcon name as they went forward and the amps didn't maintain the same quality. But yeah, let's hear a Strat. We've got to hear a Strat. And then we'll hear the old Falcon. I mean, I guess that sounded a bit like a Strat, almost. I mean, that is tuned down to D because that's the guitar I do sort of my Hendrixy D stuff on. But really? Okay, let's try. I've got this great solid body double humbucker guitar with some bare humbuckers in it. I just love this guitar. Let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, in the neck position, it almost did it, but I was playing really carefully and sort of a bit more gently there. And then in the bridge pickup, as you see, if you could stomach that. Am I being too harsh? Before we finish by hearing the old Falcon that I've got, let me just get my final rant out of my system, I guess. I'm quite a big Gibson fan. If you've watched my channel, you know I have a fair few of them. I've got my double cut Jnr, it's a Murphy Lab one. I've got my custom shop gold SG there. I've got a custom shop Les Paul Custom with the 3 pickups. I've got a vintage Gibson SG there. I've had 3 custom shop bursts before. I've had a vintage Jnr as another one, like a 56 Jnr before. I've had loads of ES guitars, vintage ones including a 61 with PAFs. I've got a history with Gibson stuff and I love them. Really do. I'm not someone who quibbles about the quality control stuff like a lot of people do. I find that charming and it's part of the way they always came out of the factory, right? Not with this amp. I'm sorry, Gibson. You were close in the sense that I give you a lot of marks for the styling of it. I wanted to love this amp. I wanted it to be my carry around, little amp. It would be really cool to have that wherever I go. With a little swampy falcony sound like you will hear out of the old one. It just doesn't cut it. It's horrible. It's harsh. It's brittle. It's not very dynamic. You don't feel the touch sensitivity of it. From what I've seen on other channels that have opened these things up, they're horribly made and they're not going to be easy. It's a very Mesa Boogie sort of a layout as far as I can tell, and probably not the most quality parts to it in some respects, and it's going to overheat and all sorts. I'm gutted because they could have carried on from the aesthetic to the actual sound, but who the hell designed this thing? In fact, who the hell does design stuff at Gibson? Because although I'm a fan of theirs and I bought a lot of their recent guitars, I feel like they're a few steps behind where they should be. They just don't put enough effort into actually going the last few yards, do they, to actually make something really feel like a replica of the originals. Because the new ones don't, and with the plasticky nitros and the hardware has never aged that well. And why do I like them? Probably because of the history and the people that played them when I was listening to classic rock when I was young, all the Jimmy Pages and everyone else. But I'm happy to still buy their guitars to some degree. But this amp, what a shame. Gibson, try harder, in my opinion. But let's hear what you were doing in the early 60s just to lead us out. And I'll be back soon with a more positive video with something that probably inspires me a hell of a lot more to play. Because this doesn't. Right. Cheers. you.